Good morning, and welcome to today's first talk, a programmatic approach to Adobe Target. My name is Albert. I work as a solution architect at diva-e's Munich office in Germany, and I've been working with diva-e or its predecessors for almost 20 years, most of the time with enterprise CMS systems, also with AEM. In the last 3 or 4 years, my focus has been shifting more and more towards other AEC solutions, mainly Adobe Target. And as AEM is moving to the cloud, so is adaptTo opening a bit up to other Adobe cloud solutions, also Target. And so thanks for having me here, for allowing me to have this talk, and thanks for your interest. So what's this talk about? Almost any Target presentation I'm aware of is focused on a marketeer audience usually, and therefore also emphasizes strongly Target's Visual Experience Composer, which is a WYSIWIG tool that allows marketeers to create target activities without any coding background. Now, that's a great tool for marketeers, but so my experience is when I talk to AEM guys, for example, they usually have not so high regard of the tool sometimes, because I guess they don't like other guys, working with a WYSIWIG tool in the website, which they created with so much effort. So the goal today is to show what's also possible with Target from a different standpoint using code. And yeah, let's have a look at it. Quick look at the agenda. So first of all, I want to give a quick overview of our targets, so we are all sitting in the same boat. Then I want to compare the aforementioned Visual Experience Composer with the so-called Formbased Activity, which is a tool that allows you to create activities purely code-based. We'll have a look at the TTXB library, which is a tool that we use in our daily job to work with form-based activities. And last but not least, I want to showcase EON's NBA campaign, showing what is possible with form-based activities in our TTXB library. So let's get rolling. What is Target? As most of you will know, Target is Adobe's testing and personalization solution. And being this, in a more abstract way, it's a framework that allows manipulation of digital content, because that's what A/B testing and personalization usually is about. You want to present the consumer of your digital content something else than default. That might be HTML, it might be a mobile app, but it might be also something more API-centric, for example, a set-top box or a voice assistant. And almost any or every personalization solution I know about relies on 3 tiers. First of all, you have to answer the 4 Ws. Who, where, when, and what do you want to personalize it, to manipulate? In Target, we call that audiences. Then you have to define the manipulation. What do you want to do? Is it a JavaScript that changes DOM, or is it maybe just a JSON offer that you send to an API? In Target, again, we call that offers. And last but not least, we don't do this for fun. There's a goal behind it. So in an A/B test, you want to see, is the contender performing better than default, or do you have higher revenue from your personalization campaign? So you have to measure and report on your goals. And in Target, we call that metrics. And if you combine this all together, you get an activity or an experiment. And that's, yeah, it's like it's one of your campaigns in your Target. Today, we are focusing on the manipulation, on offers. So how do we define what's happening on a web page? And in the HTML context, meaning if we personalize or if we manipulate on a web page, which I would say is the vast majority of all Target experiments, the standard approach is client-side, meaning after page load, a request to the Target server is initiated by Target's JavaScript library ATJS. On Target side, the audiencing kicks in. Target will evaluate the header. It will evaluate maybe some parameters which we sent with the request. It might evaluate external factors, for example, day of time. It might run some complex business logic, server-sided scripts called user profile scripts. And it might even evaluate CRM data. And once Target has decided that this user on that page at that time should see a personalization, an A/B test, maybe more than one, it will deliver the offer back to ATJS with a responses payload. ATJS will evaluate that response, and then the manipulation will take place on the page, and this is handled by JavaScript. That might be ATJS, it might be also custom JavaScript. We will have a look at that right away. And all metrics and monitoring and reporting back to Target is again handled by JavaScript. And once those reports come in, then Target can act on those and do its statistical analysis and report. There are two other modes I just want to mention, server-sided and hybrid. Especially hybrid is super interesting. It's really new. Might be the topic of an upcoming adaptTo talk maybe from us. I don't have time to go into it, but if this is something that interests you, feel free to ping me afterwards. This is something I'm really interested in. Again, our focus today is on offers. And how does that work? So, as I already mentioned, the most prominent feature is the Visual Experience Composer, certainly, because it's always part of all the presentations. It's a WYSIWIG editor. The page is loaded within Target within an iframe, and when you click on it, it highlights the DOM object you're just clicking on. You get presented with a contextual menu, and you can start manipulating it, changing the text, changing an image source, and so on. All JavaScript and CSS instructions needed to realize that manipulation are black boxed. And all activity communication with Target, so if you click on an event and that needs to be recorded, etc., is handled by VEC and ATJS, and there's actually nothing you have to do about it. And what's our key takeaway here is that all offer code is interpreted and executed directly by ATJS. Now, the alternative to it is the so-called form-based experiment. This is usually propagated by Adobe, more in the context of when you want to personalize and on API level, because of course, if there's no HTML that you can manipulate, for example, on a voice assistant, then a WYSIWYG editor makes not much sense. But you can perfectly also use it in the web-based context. What you do is that the activity then consists only of custom JavaScript and CSS, which you write, meaning all target method calls, conversion event reporting, selectors, flicker prevention, etc. All this needs to be taken care of by the dev, which usually is taken care of by ATJS and the VEC. And again, the key takeaway here is that ATJS, once it receives a form-based experiment, form-based offer, it will recognize it and it will not try to evaluate it. It will simply inject the code in the head of the page, and there's no further evaluation or execution by ATJS. Now, if we have a look at the pros and cons of both concepts, I think they're pretty obvious. I just want to point out one. WYSIWYG has its natural limits. If something is not visible or if it's not represented in standard DOM, then a WYSIWYG editor will have big problems or it won't be possible to manipulate it. Just let's have a look at a modern image component where you don't have just one image source, but you have several image sources which are, and front end usually renders out one of them depending on the viewport of the browser. It's pretty much impossible to properly manipulate something like this in a WYSIWYG because the WYSIWYG won't be able to touch those custom tags or data attributes or wherever those sources are stored. And of course, once you start calling on APIs, etc., there's hardly a way to define this in a WYSIWYG. Now, everything, of course, has its price in life, and so does form-based, creating form-based experiments. As I already said, you have to create everything. It means you need a deeper understanding of Target. You have to know about the timings, how do experiments run. You have to understand a little bit about Target APIs at least. And of course, that leads to a higher effort once you start working with form-based activities, at least initially. We were more than willing to pay the price because for us, it was pretty clear that this is the way to go as an agency. For a marketeer in a company working with Target, VEC certainly is a very good product. For us as an agency working as an implementer, form-based activities offer so much more flexibility because you're working with JavaScript. So you can, in the end of the day, you can do anything that JavaScript allows. But working with it, of course, over the time, we wanted to prevent redundancies. We wanted to have code that is readable for all the devs in the project, and so on. We are lazy, so we didn't want to write stuff more than once if possible. And so with time, we developed our own library that helps us in the work with form-based activities. It's called TTXB. That is from a time where Target was still called Test and Target. So it's for Test and Target Experience, actually. And I would like actually to go into detail, but we don't have time today. It offers us it's a tool set, actually. It's not a Target extension per se. Target knows the concept of extensions. This is more like a man in the middle. It capsules a lot of the Target methods that we work regularly, and it adds a lot of methods that we need, for example, on mutation observer, automatic logging, easy connection to third-party tools like, for example, Google Analytics, and so on. And we are planning to open source this. It won't happen this year. It might happen next year. Again, this might be a nice topic for one of the following adaptTos. So here I'm just brushing it, and just to show you what's possible. This is a standard experiment. It changes the stage, the hero stage on the web page. This 30 lines of code, I would say that 90% of this is blueprint. And this includes everything. Reporting, conversion, setting up the conversion events, flicker prevention, error handling, and so on, much more than ATJS actually offers. And yeah, so that's what we can achieve with TTXP in our daily work. And then working with the form-based activities doesn't take much longer than working with VC. Usually, actually, this works faster than setting the same thing up in VC. Of course, here I picked something very standard, very simple, just to showcase how small the code can be. Let me show you something else. This is like on the other side of the equation. This is one of our largest experiments. I've highlighted the scroll bar in the top right, so you get an idea. It's about 400 lines of code. This is non-standard, totally. We don't have many of those. But this here talks to React apps. It fires it fires multiple XHR calls on config files. It gets content from XHR. It actually includes some audiencing, which in this case should be handled by the app, by the experiment itself, and not by Target. And so just to highlight, everything is possible when working with code. And what this actually is, it's EON's next best action campaign. And that's like our example that we would like to showcase today, which we created with form-based activities and with TTXP, and it would have been maybe possible without TTXP, but certainly not without form-based activities. So what is it all about? Next best actions or next best offers are not a new concept. It's not been invented by EON. And what it's all about is that you as a company, as a marketing department, try to find out what are the most relevant activities or offers that you want to present to your customer in their next interaction with your website. That might be a cross-sell or upsell offer. It might be churn prevention, or maybe you want to promote a certain product. And so when EON contacted us because of that project, they already had an algorithm, and so the so-called EON NDA engine up and running, which calculated those activities for each of their existing customers. The algorithm was based mainly, of course, on CRM data, but also on other offline and online data, for example, Adobe Campaign. The calculations were made on a daily basis, and they were already used in the offline context. And so the next thing EON wanted to reach is to use this data also in the online web context. And that's actually something Target is perfect for, so we got the job. Of course, as always, it should be as flexible and automated as possible. And out of this came a pretty impressive spec sheet. That one would consume 1 or 2 talks, actually. So I'm just having a look at 3 excerpts from that spec sheet. So first of all, of course, the task was to make that data accessible for Target's audiencing engine. Secondly, and that was, I I guess, the most complex task. EON already knew that this is going to be a very long-running campaign, that it's going to be highly fluctuative because the NBAs are changing all the time. The web page is changing, so what also would be changing all the time is where do you want to present those NBAs on the page, in what form. And so what they wanted to achieve is that the configuration, that they will be able to have a real-time, actually hot config of the activity outside of Target. They didn't want to call us when they changed something. They didn't want to stop or start the activity. They wanted to have an outside possibility to config everything. And with everything, I really mean everything. The activation, pausing, and deletion of NBA campaigns, defining multiple output formats, because it might be a hero stage, it might be a pop-up or a section, a grid section, teaser. Flexible NBA allocation, that was one of the top priorities. As they have a huge number of NBAs, and we're talking about 30 of them currently, not every NBA was fitting on every page. So some offers might be best fitting in the smart home shop, others in my EON, which is their self-service area, and others on the start page, for example. So they wanted to allocate different NBAs to different locations. They wanted to have flexible content allocation, meaning we are working with external HTML fragments, and usually those are allocated in if you set up a standard experiment and you work with external fragments, you allocate them within Target, which works perfectly. But of course, if there's a change, you need to edit the activity, and that's exactly what they didn't want. They wanted to have that outside in a more programmatic way. And last of all of that should have been freely scalable, the number of NBAs, of output formats, of target pages. Yeah, so that was a challenge. And another thing I would like to have a quick look on today is the content, which I already said was in external fragments. The creation and provisioning should happen by AEM in the usual way that their content editors work. And at the point of the time when we started with the experiment, we are talking about AEMs 6.3. So let's have a look how we handled some of those challenges. First of all, and I'm just going to highlight this shortly because this is not the actual focus of this talk today, but it's interesting. You see I've put in some resources. How did we get the data into the Target's audiencing engine? And what we actually used here is Target's Adobe's customer attributes. They're a feature of their People Core service. The People Core service, again, actually it's a technical subset of Audience Manager, and it's free to use for any Adobe AEC customer. So if you have AEM or Target or Analytics, it's in the basket. And what it allows you to do is to upload non-PII, anonymized or pseudonymized data into the Experience Cloud and make that data accessible to other to AEC tools, for example, Target. Of course, you have to match that data with your website visitor, and that happens by Mbox third-party ID parameter. Yeah, have a look at the resources if this is more of interest for you, or contact me. I'd be more than happy to elaborate here and go into detail. So again, the biggest task was, I guess, the outside configuration of Adobe Target, of the activity. And actually what we did there without planning to do so explicitly is that we set up a kind of a little model view control architecture. So the target activity itself doesn't contain any configuration or content information whatsoever, only the execution code. The view, the content is stored and provisioned by AEM, and all configuration, everything I talked before, is defined in a separate JSON document, which is maintained and stored by the client. And that's where when they want to change something in real time, they just change that document and store it again on, you can have it in the DOM, for example, and that's it. And in real time, your configurations will be active on the next activity call by a website visitor, and when the JSON is loaded by the activity. So on activity execution, the JSON file is loaded by the offer via XHR. The offer then evaluates the config file to find the most relevant NDA for the web page where you're currently on and the fitting output format, which might be, as I mentioned, hero stage or pop-up. It then retrieves the matching HTML fragment URI from the config, which is also stored there. And then it fires a second XHR call on AEM, gets the fragment, and injects it into the DOM. And that's how we realized, that's how we mastered that challenge. We will have another look at it in a nice little animation, I hope. So the third requirement, content creation and provisioning by AEM. So as I said, we were on 6.3. That was when experience fragments were introduced. So of course, our first idea was, let's have a look at experience fragments. So from 6.3 until 6.6.51, I think there was a little bug. It was actually nothing big, but it was a little bug from my point of view with experience fragments and Target, which was that if you exported experience fragments to Target, they all were dropped into the root node of Adobe Target. And if you moved them from there to a subfolder, they got disconnected from AEM. Meaning from that time on, there was no update possible whatsoever. And the EON's Target project is huge. We have more than 200 activities for them, which we realized in the last years. So there would have been lying about 300 plus fragments in the root node over time. And as stupid as it is, that little thing made it totally unusable for us because it was simply not a way to work. Actually, that bug was fixed by Provision itself. So thanks, guys, for this. And also, as I said, we wanted to retrieve the fragments programmatically. So experience fragments maybe are not the best solution for that. I'm actually not totally aware how you can expose them without including them into a site or delivering them to a different product. I guess it's kind of possible. In 6.3, we didn't find a solution for that. So we needed to find an alternative solution. And that was, as I already mentioned, that we fired direct XHR calls on fragment JCR nodes. We just picked the node beneath JCR content. That is our fragment, the content that's created normally in a separate side section by EON's content editors. And there were two little challenges we had to tackle. First of all, we needed to know the URI of the JCR node. And as on prod, almost nobody has access to CRXDE. It's kind of tricky to get that URI. So we needed a way to expose it, to be able to include it within the JSON, or that the client is able to include it into the JSON for mapping. And the other little challenge was that sometimes our offer consisted of sibling nodes. So we needed a single URI call. So we needed some kind of wrapper around it to make it possible to access that information by a single call. And so we just to have some AEM on that talk, we created a little JCR wrapper component. So in the upper part, you see that we expose the path in edit mode, and then it's just a parses with some data attributes that are valuable for us, and that's about it. I know that's kind of insulting for you guys regarding the complexity in AEM, but yeah, just to showcase that. And that actually works perfect. So we are using that all the time with NBA, and yeah, nice little solution. Let's have a look at this in moving. So as I said, the user's top 3 next best actions are stored in the Adobe's People Core service. All the configuration, what should happen, is stored in JSON file, and that actually looks totally different than this here. This is just for demonstration. It's a pretty complex file. All content is stored and provisioned by AEM as little fragments that we just saw. And the NBA controller, which is our offer, our target offer, sits in the middle and controls everything. Now, on page load of a certain site, the controller will pick up the information from Adobe's People Core Service. It will try to match it with the config file, and if it finds a match between the user's NBAs and what is configured for that special page, then it will pick the right output format. In this case, it's a section. It will then fire on Adobe AEM, get the fragment, and inject it into DOM. For a different page, it will find a different match in a different format. Here it's a modal, a pop-up. It again will get the content from AEM and inject it in the page. This actually is a React component which we are fetching and then triggering by something else that we have in our TTXB. And on the homepage, actually, we have two possible NBAs in the hero stage and in section. And so just to highlight it, here we have two matches for the user, smart home and cross-sell. So it will put cross-sell in the default content, replace the default content of hero stage. And also what I want to show here is, as you saw, we had already a cross-sell on the sales side as modal, and this is actually something that happens quite often. And config file says, okay, you can use cross-sell on that page too, but please use it in a different output format here. It's a grid section. So it will get a different variant of the same NBA and inject it into the page. Yeah, that's about it. Just a few numbers. We have currently 32 different campaigns, 3 different layout types, 1 to 3 different content variants. That's something I haven't talked actually about it. So one NBA can have 2 or 3 different hero stages for different pages, which made it a little bit more complex. And we currently, I think, have 9 or 10 qualified web pages. This is a bit older. And what that means that with one single target activity, we are currently able to deliver programmatically 94 different live NBA experiences. And yeah, that's it. So thanks for your time and interest. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. There's not so much time left. So also totally feel free to ping me on later on. I'd be more than happy to discuss details of this talk or other stuff. I know this is not so much related to Sling or OSGI, what you're doing usually, but maybe I had some interest of you. So look, no questions? Anybody? If not, we can have a short look also at the whole thing in action. So what you see here is EON's website. This is what I can't do here is log in as a customer to qualify for an NBA. But you see we have EON's Power starting page for Power here, and just focus on this area. So we have, and then what I'm doing is I'll inject a test parameter. And now what I spoofed is the matching of the custom. So what's not happening here is a match with the customer attributes. But now we have here personalized content for EcoPower. And if we look at we'll have a short look at what happens in the network. This is where the actual offer gets called by Target. So this here actually is our payload. This is the huge code which I showed you before. Then the offer fires a second call on to retrieve a JSON document, which we see here. So this is actually the definition of the experiment. And in the last call, we are firing directly on EON. We are getting the fragment and injecting it into DOM. And then we have our little experience here, which looks, of course, differently if we change the viewport. And that's about it. I still see no questions. Thanks, Rainer. And okay, thanks for your time. Thanks for your interest. Something else than usual, I guess, for adaptTo. And maybe see you later in the chat. Bye-bye.